Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far, far back in time so far. In fact, that the land we call Sudan today is still ruled by the rhythm of the Nile and lit only by fire and moonlight. You're barefoot, and the ground is soft underfoot damp with morning dew and silt from the recent flooding. There's no hum of traffic, no Wi-Fi, no food delivery app unless you count a goat bleeding from the next village over. But you've got something better than modern convenience. You've got a mission to brew beer the way ancient Nubians did in the shadows of pyramids and palm trees with the river watching. You squint as the sun creeps over the horizon. It glitters across the Nile's surface, a molten line of gold cutting through reed's clay and crocodile tracks. Your eyelids are heavy, but not from sleep. They're heavy from the warmth, the stillness, the knowledge that this day won't be fast or easy, but it will be worth it. Historians still argue whether Nubian beer was more ceremonial or social, but you're not here to debate. You're here to taste the process for yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells like damp earth and early firewood. You pass a few clay huts on your way toward the floodplain where the season's barley harvest is being pulled from the black mud. Children run barefoot through puddles. One of them almost bowls you over grinning as he clutches a bundle of reeds like it's a treasure. A woman with long braids balances a heavy basket on her head full of barley heads still clumped with wet dirt. It's harvest season, and that means the brewing cycle is about to begin again. You'll need to start soon before the barley sprouts on its own and becomes bird food. You glance down at your hands. They're already smudged with river mud. The beer hasn't even started, and you're already wearing it. The Nile is generous, but not predictable. Some years the flood gives everything. Some years it forgets. Ancient Nubians watched the water like hawks, praying to gods with names lost to time, just to coax the right flood level. Not too little, not too much. Just enough to leave behind silt-rich dark silt where barley loves to grow. And if the gods are kind, where beer will bloom. You walk with the others to the edges of the field. The barley plants are short and tough, nothing like the fluffy golden wheat you see in modern farms. These grains are stubborn. They survive floods and sun. They're not here for your smoothie bowl. They're here to be reborn as beer. You reach down and yank a clump from the earth. It gives with a satisfying squelch. The heads are coarse, scratchy against your palms. You'll need to dry them fast before mildew sets in. There's no warehouse, no silo, no plastic tarp, just woven mats on sun-warmed clay. So you help spread them, feeling the kernels rattle under your fingers. The woman next to you grunts in approval. She has the deep-lined hands of someone who's been doing this since before you were born, and possibly before the Nile had a name. She doesn't speak, but nods once a quiet blessing that means good. You're not useless. Your fingers already itch. Barley skin is sharp. You blow into your hands and squint up at the sun. It's going to be a long day. A few yards away, someone has set out dried date fruits lined up in neat rows. Some are plump, some shriveled. Their sticky skins catch flies and sunlight in equal measure. You've heard rumors that Nubians use date paste in their beer. Some say it was for flavor, others say it sped up fermentation. Historians still argue whether it was technique or tradition science or sweet tooth. Nearby, two kids have found a cracked jar and are filling it with river water. You wince. It's the same river crocodiles poop in, but it's also the same river that gives life to the entire region. You'll boil it later. Probably. Hopefully. There's a dog sniffing at your basket. Not a friendly one. More of a try me and see what happens kind of dog. You shoo it away with a hiss and it retreats offended. The sun is higher now. Your basket is half full of barley. You know what comes next. The drying, the sorting, the quiet waiting that never feels long enough, because soon the real work begins. You trudge toward the village with your haul. Your feet leave dark prints on the packed earth. Children laugh behind you. One of them is already singing an off-key brewing song, something about frogs in clay jars. You hum along. The melody's catchy. And, if you're lucky, it'll be the only thing stuck in your head tonight. Back in the brewing hut, the air is thick with dust and hope. You set your basket down near the wall and stretch your back. The ceiling is low. The walls are streaked with soot. In one corner, a jar is already bubbling quietly. Someone got an early start. You inhale the sour-sweet scent and smile. It smells like home, or at least like something that might let you sleep a little better tonight. But first, you have to earn it. You wake up the next morning with a sore back, barley husks in your hair, and the unmistakable smell of fermented dreams drifting in from the neighboring hut. The air is cooler now, with that gentle hush of morning before the day gets too loud. Outside, the Nile has already begun its slow conversation with the sun mist curling above its surface, whispering secrets from thousands of years ago. It's time to deal with the barley. You step out into the village courtyard where the grains you helped harvest yesterday are spread out on mats catching early light. Some birds are eyeing the scene with impure intentions, so you shoo them off with a lazy flap of your arms. The grains are mostly dry now, light firm, and just beginning to whisper of their new purpose. You crouch down and scoop up a handful. They're warm from the sun, and you can almost hear them crackle. Soon they'll be soaked again. Not by the Nile this time, but by your own hand, as part of the malting process. But before you get there, you need to sort the mess. Broken husks, pebbles, hushed apologies to your spine. This is the unglamorous part of brewing. You sit cross-legged and begin the slow, meditative task of winnowing. One handful at a time, you toss the grain gently into the air and let the wind carry away the lighter chaff. A young girl joins you. She doesn't say a word, just copies your motions exactly a little too dramatically. Her chaff goes everywhere. You try not to laugh. You don't want her to stop. As the sun climbs higher, the grains get warmer, and so do your hands. The smell of sun-dried barley isn't exactly delicious, but it's comforting, like something old and patient. By midday, the village is stirring. Men are gathering near the granary, arguing about fishing nets, or maybe taxes. It's hard to tell. Women move between huts carrying pots on their heads with the kind of grace you'll never achieve, no matter how many yoga classes you pretend you took. You take your sorted barley into one of the brewing huts. It's cool inside the kind of cool that clay walls offer even in brutal heat. The brewing pit is still, but the jars from yesterday are alive. You hear them before you smell them, soft pops and bubbles like whispers from something halfway between food and magic. Now comes the next big moment, soaking the barley. You pour water from a clay jug into a large basin. It's river water, but filtered through a cloth sack stuffed with reeds and a prayer. You stir the grains with your hand, feeling them soak and sink. The water turns cloudy fast. This isn't some hipster craft brewery with filtered perfection. This is earthy. This is real. You leave the barley to soak for the day and spend the afternoon weaving more reed mats. They'll be used for drying later, for straining, for fending off overly curious goats. Everything has a second life here. Even old mats get turned into sandals when they fray. When you return, the barley has changed. It's swollen heavy and smells faintly of wet bread. You drain it carefully and spread it out again, this time in thinner layers to sprout. This is the malting stage, and you're now a temporary babysitter for thousands of tiny plants that think they've been born just to grow. Joke's on them, they're destined for beer. Every few hours, you'll have to check the sprouts, stir them, turn them so they don't mold. It's the kind of tedious care that makes you question your life choices, but it's also where the transformation begins. Enzymes awaken, starches unlock. This is chemistry without the lab coat, just bare hands, ancient instincts, and a lot of side-eye toward clouds that might bring surprise rain. You tuck yourself in for the night beside the sprouting mats. The smell is stronger now, earthy, grassy, a little like overcooked spinach. It's not great, but it's not bad either. It just is. Somewhere nearby, a goat snorts in its sleep. A few men are still talking by the fire, telling the same story for the 5th time, adding more drama each round. You catch snippets. And then he said it was the best batch he ever tasted, but I saw him spit it behind the shrine. You smile. Brewer gossip is eternal. The next day, your barley babies have grown tiny white tails, sprouts. That means it's go time. But now comes another step that even seasoned brewers dread: drying the malt before it spoils. You spread it once more on your finest mats, setting them out just where the morning sun hits strongest. A few cats stroll by, uninterested in anything that doesn't squeak. One of them sits on a mat. You consider bribing it to leave with a dried fish. It ignores you. Cats are timeless. As the grains dry, you notice some have curled oddly. You pick one up, rub it between your fingers, and frown. Too brittle. That's a failed sprout. Happens to the best of us. You toss it aside and move on. This whole process is a balancing act. Moisture, warmth, airflow. One mistake and your beer tastes like wet sand, which, for the record, is not a vibe. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians used kilns to dry their malt or relied purely on the sun. You suspect it was both, depending on the season, the resources, and the mood of the brewer's mother-in-law. The sun creeps toward the horizon. You flip the last batch of malt and feel proud. You've shepherded these stubborn seeds from harvest to sprout to readiness. They're dry, golden, and slightly sweet-smelling. You think, no, you know this is going to be a good brew. You gather the baskets, careful not to spill a single grain. Tomorrow you'll grind them. Tomorrow the real fun begins. But for now, you sit on the edge of the brewery's shaded threshold, watching the Nile darken under a ribbon of clouds. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that asks for nothing and gives everything. You close your eyes. The malt is ready, and so are you. You're up before the sun today. Though, to be honest, it never really got dark. The Nubian night is a chorus of whispers, frogs croaking by the marshes, insects gossiping in the reeds, an old man somewhere snoring like a distant drum. You roll your shoulders and step outside. It's still cool enough that the sand doesn't burn your feet. Yet. Today is grinding day. The baskets of malted barley wait near the door like loyal dogs. You carry them over to the grinding stones, flat slabs of sandstone, worn smooth by generations of tired hands. You kneel and reach for the top stone, already warm to the touch. Your arms ache in anticipation. You begin to grind. There's no special ceremony, no audience, just the rhythmic scrape of stone against stone and the grainy crunch of barley surrendering to flour. After 10 minutes, you've produced enough to fill half a cup and enough wrist pain to last a week. Modern gyms have nothing on ancient breweries. It's dusty work. Bits of husk cling to your arms. Your nose itches. You sneeze and nearly knock over the flour bowl. A young boy snickers. He's perched nearby, chewing a piece of sugarcane, clearly here for the entertainment. You hand him the bowl. He doesn't move. He's not here to help, just here to witness your slow descent into arm fatigue. The flour's not smooth. It's coarse, like beach sand with ambition. And that's exactly what you want. If it's too fine, the beer gets cloudy. Too chunky, and you might as well chew it straight from the jar. You find your rhythm. Scrape, grind, scoop. Scrape, grind, scoop. You wonder if the gods of grain accept shoulder cramps as tribute. By mid-morning, you've got enough ground malt for a proper batch. You stretch your back with a noise that sounds like a tree giving up. The flour goes into a large clay mixing bowl, and now it's time to add the next character in this strange culinary opera date paste. The dates have been soaking overnight, turning into a gooey golden brown sludge that smells like fermented candy. You scoop it out with your fingers, sticky and sweet, and mix it into the barley flour. The paste darkens the dough, and suddenly everything smells like a festival. Historians still debate whether the dates were used for sugar for consistency, or just because someone once said, "What if we made beer taste like joy?" You don't know. You just know your hands are now a crime scene of stickiness. You knead the mixture until it forms a thick, heavy dough. It clings to your fingers like it has abandonment issues. A woman enters the hut, nods at your progress, and starts prepping the dome oven. It's a clay structure blackened with years of use. Smoke curls out of the vent as she stuffs in dry dung and kindling. Yes, dung. No, you don't get to complain. Everyone uses it, even the elite. It burns hot, it's free, and after 10 minutes near the fire, you won't smell anything ever again. The oven heats fast. You shape the dough into rough loaves somewhere between a biscuit and a broken brick. Each one gets a deep score across the top so it bakes evenly. You lay them on a flat paddle and slide them into the mouth of the oven. Instantly, the smell changes charred crust, bubbling dates, roasted barley. You take a step back. The heat hits your face like a slap from the sun. The loaves bake unevenly, and that's fine. Some come out pale and soft. Others are dark and hard as rocks. One loaf actually explodes. The boy with the sugarcane cheers like he's at a gladiator match. You stack the baked loaves into a jar still steaming. These aren't for dinner. These are beer bread, brewed not chewed. They'll be soaked in water, broken down into a pulpy mash that will form the heart of the beer. You let the loaves cool while prepping the clay vats. They're enormous. Some are taller than your waist. Lined with bitumen or beeswax, they smell faintly of history and a little like moldy figs. You fill them halfway with water, then drop in the broken beer loaves, watching them dissolve into a brown, lumpy sludge. It's not pretty. In fact, it looks like something you'd apologize for, but you stir anyway. A thick wooden paddle moves the mixture slowly, and steam rises as the bread begins to break down. You lean in to sniff. Sweet, funky, a little like wet dog. Promising. You stir in the ground malt, next slowly watching it mix with the slurry. A few curious flies buzz overhead. One lands on your forehead and dares you to flinch. You don't. You're a brewer now. You've seen things. This mash will sit overnight, fermenting gently as the natural yeasts go to work. Tomorrow you'll add it to the main fermentation jars near the fire pit. For now, you cover the vat with palm fronds, tie it loosely with twine, and wipe the sweat from your eyes. You've come a long way since you first set foot on this floodplain. From barley fields to sticky dates, from dung ovens to bubbling sludge, you're finally seeing the brew come together. As evening approaches, the village quiets. A pot clinks somewhere. Children argue over something trivial, probably whose goat smells the worst. You take one last look at your beer mash, tucked in for the night like a very odd baby. You step outside and sit beneath the stars, arm-sore hands, stained belly humming with the scent of roasted dates. Tomorrow, the magic begins. You wake with the faint smell of fermentation wafting through the thatch roof above you. It's sweet and sharp, like bread gone rogue, and for a moment, you wonder if someone's been cooking near your bed. But no, it's the mash. It's alive now, and it's time to move it. You stretch your arms, which feel like they've been used to grind grain in your sleep. There's barley dust under your fingernails and date paste in your hair. You don't remember how that got there. Honestly, you don't ask questions anymore. Outside, the morning air is damp and warm. Dew still clings to the clay jars, beating on the surface like tiny glass pearls. The big vat of mash is waiting for you near the wall. You untie the palm fronds and peel them back. A wave of hot, sour aroma punches you in the face. You blink. That's strong. Not bad necessarily, just committed. You stir the mash with a paddle. It resists. Bubbles pop near the surface. This stuff has a pulse now. You can almost hear it breathe. Historians still debate whether Nubians understood fermentation as a biological process or just thought it was divine mischief. Either way, it works. And it's working fast. You ladle the thick mixture into a set of wide-necked fermentation jars, big round and slightly chipped from years of use. They're sunken into the ground near the fire pit, arranged in a semicircle like ancient council members. You pour, slowly trying not to splash. The mash slurps into the jars like it's reluctantly being buried. A young man joins you carrying a bundle of dry herbs. He hands them to you with a shrug. No one's sure exactly which herbs ancient Nubians might have added to their brews, but some theories suggest sedge or chamomile-like plants for flavor preservation or just to keep bugs away. You crumble a few into the jars, watching them swirl in the foam like tiny ships lost at sea. The jars are hot at the base. That's the fire pit, doing its thing low heat, rising from stones buried beneath. Not enough to cook, just enough to encourage the brew to wake up, stretch, and start its chemical ballet. You cover the tops loosely with more palm fronds and let nature take over. You sit nearby, poking at the fire with a stick. Embers crackle, smoke curls upward, and somewhere behind you, a goat makes a noise that could either mean hunger or judgment. You don't turn around. Fermentation takes time. You're not going anywhere for a while, so you wander. You find yourself walking toward the riverbank, stepping over sleeping dogs and open baskets. At the water's edge, women are washing clothes, their voices bright and rhythmic. You squat near the reeds and trail your fingers through the shallows. The Nile is everything here: barley fish, mud life, and beer. Without it, your jar would be empty. You scoop some water into a gourd and sniff. It's got that telltale Nile funk, but after enough boiling and prayer, it'll do just fine. By midday, you check the jars again. Foam has risen to the rim and dried into flaky rings along the clay. That's a good sign. Yeast is partying. The mash has darkened, thickened smells like sour bread and excitement. You stir gently with a stick, then taste a drop on your fingertip. It's interesting. Still rough, still raw. A little sour, a little sweet. Your tongue tingles. It's not beer yet, but it's definitely not soup. A few kids run by carrying reed straws, long, thin, slightly curved. You grab one. It's time to test the filter. You plunge the straw into one of the fermentation jars and take a careful sip. The reed has tiny slits at the end designed to keep solids out while letting the liquid through. It's not foolproof. You still get a mouthful of what might be soggy bread, but you can definitely taste the change. This is where the beer starts to feel real. Not just ingredients and steps, but a drink with flavor, with presence. Nubian beer wasn't carbonated, wasn't chilled, and definitely wasn't clear, but it had soul. It had purpose. You sit on a low stool, sipping slowly, squinting at the horizon. A few elders have gathered nearby, pretending not to watch you. One of them makes a comment in a dry voice that might be a compliment or a warning. You smile anyway. Historians still argue whether Nubian beer was stronger or weaker than Egyptian beer. Some think it was more nutritious. Others think it was just easier to make badly. You suspect it was both, depending on who was stirring and who was drinking. By late afternoon, the sun begins to lean. You uncover the jars again, stir them once more, and decide it's time to cool things down. You drag the jars toward the shaded side of the hut. No easy feat, by the way. Each one weighs more than a toddler with opinions. You leave them there to finish fermenting overnight. As the light fades, the air grows thicker. Crickets begin their nightly concert. You clean your tools, rinse the reed straws in a bucket, and sit by the edge of the hut with a clay cup in your lap. You scoop a bit of the freshest batch and sip. It's still warm, still strange, but better than this morning, better than yesterday. Progress. You lean back against the wall, barley crumbs still stuck to your elbow, and exhale. The beer is almost ready. The next morning, you wake to the sound of shouting. Not angry shouting, more like the excited chaos of too many people trying to describe the same goat theft in slightly different ways. You roll over, blink grit from your eyes, and smell something sharp in the air. It's not fire. It's not breakfast. It's sour, funky, alive. The beer is waking up. You throw on your linen wrap and stumble outside. The sun's barely climbed above the palms, but the brewing hut is already buzzing. A group has gathered near the fermentation jars, clustered around them like they're telling ghost stories. You elbow through, gently nodding at a wide-eyed boy with a smear of flour on his forehead. And there it is. The foam has calmed, but now the beer has taken on a deeper hue, amber brown with a surface like wrinkled cloth. You lean close and sniff. It bites back a little, sharp, fruity, and beneath it, a faint earthiness that reminds you of wet baskets and unwashed hands. It's perfect. You grab the paddle and stir slowly. The resistance is different today. The slurry is thicker and the bubbles are fewer. That's good. It means the yeasts are settling down, having completed their sacred work. Historians still argue whether Nubians brewed for alcohol content or simply as a nutrient-rich food, thick enough to drink, but filling enough to skip dinner. You think maybe they didn't bother separating the two ideas. Eat, drink, feel warm, repeat. Once stirred, the next task begins separating the drink from the grits. This part is messy. You and two others hoist one of the smaller jars onto a raised stand. It wobbles. One of you coughs. The other prays. Somehow it stays upright. You insert a handful of reeds into the mouth like a makeshift filter, and then you begin pouring. The liquid comes out slow, dark, and opaque. Not pretty, not clean, but unmistakably beer. It sloshes into a wide, shallow bowl lined with woven fiber mats, your second filter. A little too much spills. Someone curses softly in ancient Nubian. You think it's a word that roughly translates to "you had one job." Eventually the bowl fills. You dip a clay cup into it and take another sip. The taste has changed again. Still sour, but rounder, fuller. The date sweetness lingers on your tongue, and there's an unexpected bitterness at the edge. A mystery herb, perhaps. Or maybe you just chewed a barley husk. Hard to tell. As more people gather, you begin filling cups, passing them around like invitations to a sleepy festival. Elders sip with practiced silence. One smiles and shows you a mostly toothless grin. A child tries to drink and immediately spits it out horrified. Everyone laughs. A dog barks in approval, though it's probably just begging for spilled grain. One of the women brings over a platter of flat cakes, savory not sweet, meant to pair with the beer. They're crumbly and dry, but together with the drink, they make a kind of balance, the solid and the sloshy, the old and the always. You take a break near the shade of a fig tree. The air is thick with dust and barley-scented humidity. Someone begins a quiet tune on a flute, just 3 notes over and over, like a lullaby for bees. A young man beside you talks about his uncle's legendary batch from last flood season. It apparently caused both a marriage proposal and a snake fight. You're not sure if those were the same event. You nod politely and drink more. Historians still puzzle over how consistent these ancient brews really were. With no precise measurements, no thermometers, no timers, every batch was a gamble. Was the barley too wet? Was the yeast too wild? Did the herbs make it healing or hallucinogenic? There are records of priests forbidding certain batches for being too spirited, whatever that means. Back at the jars, the fermentation continues. Some of the beer will be consumed fresh within a day or two, but some, just a portion, will be stored in sealed jars and buried in the cool earth for later. Special occasions, offerings, bribes. You're told the clay lids are sealed with a paste made from ash beeswax and crushed eggshells. Not delicious, but effective. You volunteer to help carry one of the finished jars to the shrine at the edge of the village. It's an unassuming structure, mud brick walls, faded paint, an altar stone darkened with years of gifts. A carved ibex stares down at you from the lintel, eyes wide like it just heard a bad joke. You place the jar gently at the base alongside dried fish, 2 loaves of bread, and a cluster of fresh reeds. Someone chants softly. You bow your head not out of belief, but out of respect. Beer, after all, isn't just for pleasure here. It's for ancestors, for harvest, for health, and for moments like this where the ordinary becomes ritual just by slowing down. As you return to the brewing hut, the sun begins to dip. Shadows stretch across the courtyard. Children chase each other with palm fronds. Someone starts up the flute again, this time in a minor key. You stretch your legs, and sip what's left in your cup. It's warm, unfiltered, gritty, a little weird. You love it. By the next morning, the air in the village has shifted. There's a kind of lazy buzz everywhere. Dogs too tired to bark, children poking at the remains of reed mats, and a growing line of half-finished cups scattered across doorways like sleepy breadcrumbs. It's a drinking day, not a brewing day. And today, the beer isn't just for tasting, it's for sharing. You head to the shaded center of the village, where a wide circle has formed beneath a canopy of woven mats. Low stools, smoothed stones, and old baskets serve as makeshift seats. People gather slowly, carrying reed straws, clay cups, and in one case, a small lute carved from bone and goat sinew. There's no invitation needed. If you're here, you drink. At the center of the circle is the prize, a massive, wide-mouthed beer jar, cooled by the breeze and shaded like royalty. Someone's even decorated it with a ring of flower petals and scraps of old cloth, half reverent, half festive. You step forward and plant your reed straw deep into the murky surface. It vanishes with a soft plonk. You take a sip. It's better than yesterday, somehow richer. The flavors have settled, the rough edges smoothed out overnight. Still sour, still warm, still a little like soggy bread, soaked in memories, but now undeniably beer. The others join you. Straw tips bob and clink as more sippers lean in. You're shoulder to shoulder with people you've barely spoken to, but the beer bridges the gap. A toothless old man laughs mid-sip and nearly snorts foam. A woman across from you raises an eyebrow at the taste, then shrugs and keeps drinking. No one is trying to be poetic about it. It's not a wine tasting, it's community. Someone passes around a small bowl of roasted lentils and dried figs. They pair surprisingly well, salty, chewy, and grounding after too many sips of something that feels like ancient porridge, in a good way. A child tries to sneak a drink, is promptly shooed away, and starts sulking beside a chicken. The chicken also looks mildly offended. You learn quickly that this isn't just about the beer, it's about the rhythm. Sip, pause, talk, sip again. Sometimes no one speaks for minutes, just the sound of reeds slurping and wind rustling in the palms above. Then, without warning, someone starts a story. It's always a good one about a cousin who drank so much beer last season he tried to ride a goat into the river. About a brewer who claimed the gods whispered recipes in her sleep, only to be caught adding honey when no one was looking. Historians still argue whether these tales have any basis in truth, but you're too busy laughing to care. Midway through the gathering, a minor argument breaks out. Apparently, one elder believes this year's batch is superior to last year's legendary banana-flavored Miracle Brew, while another insists that batch gave everyone nightmares and should not be spoken of. You sip quietly and pretend to take no sides, though honestly, you're kind of curious about nightmare beer. A game begins an informal contest of strength. Two men square off on the packed earth, clasping each other's elbows in the traditional arm wrestling stance. Their arms shake, veins bulge, onlookers cheer or jeer. One of them lets out a belch that could wake the ibis gods, and the other falls over laughing. No winner declared, just more beer passed around. The beer starts to change as the sun climbs higher. Warmer now, a little flatter. More sediment gathers at the bottom, and a few brave souls start scooping it up like pudding. You decline. There's getting into it, and then there's whatever that is. At one point, a quiet singer starts up a chant low and slow in a language you barely recognize, more rhythm than meaning. Others join in some harmonizing, others just humming tunelessly, but with enthusiasm. It's hypnotic. You find yourself swaying your straw, forgotten in the jar, your head tilting back against a stack of dried grass. Historians note that gatherings like this weren't just social, they were economic, spiritual, and sometimes even political. Beer was offered to the gods, but also to village leaders, laborers, guests, and allies. It greased the wheels of daily life. It made hard work tolerable and good days memorable. You sip again. The flavor is now unmistakably familiar. It's not like anything in modern bars. There's no hops, no fizz, no sharp citrusy notes, just fermented grain, residual sweetness, and an echo of earth. You could get used to this. Eventually, the big jar runs low. People switch to smaller vessels brought from home, some gourd cups, some carved from bone, others just old bowls repurposed from soup duty. You share a cup with a stranger who doesn't speak your dialect but smiles after every sip. That's enough. You lean back, arms crossed behind your head, watching the sky through the holes in the reed canopy. The day is hot, the breeze is slow, and the beer, somehow, is still cold enough to matter. A goat wanders through the circle and nearly upends the jar. Everyone gasps. Someone throws a date pit. Crisis averted. The goat gives everyone side-eye and saunters off like it owns the village. By sunset, only a few remain. The jar is empty. The stories are done. The last reed straws are bent and soggy, tossed into the fire pit, like tired heroes. You rise slowly, your legs unsure if they're made of muscle or dough. The brewing hut waits in the distance. You walk toward it as the sky fades orange, then purple, then the quiet black of Nile night. And somehow, even though your cup is empty, you feel full. You sleep like a sun-baked stone that night, curled near a fire that dies down slowly beside you. But even in dreams, the scent of yeast and barley clings to your skin. When the first bird calls of morning break through the palm fronds, you open your eyes and realize today you're back in the brewery not to drink, but to bake. Yes, again. You stretch, rinse your face in a clay bowl filled with river water, and head for the workbench just outside the hut. The sun isn't high yet, but the air already carries heat. Bees buzz lazily around a tray of leftover dates. You steal one and bite into it. Sweet, sticky, and just a little fermented, basically breakfast. Today's task is making a new round of beer bread. Not to eat, of course, but to prepare for the next batch of brewing. You take the last of the malted barley flour saved from the earlier grinding session and mix it with fresh water in a wide stone bowl. The texture is uneven, stubbornly lumpy, like it knows it's headed straight for the oven. You stir with your hands, elbows deep in prehistoric porridge, until the dough begins to form. The dates go in next, mashed into a soft paste. This batch uses less date than before, though a subtle tweak to experiment with sweetness. You can't help but feel a quiet pride in the thought that this recipe might become someone's favorite someday, even if it's just a ghost in a tomb painting. You shape the dough into rounds, some large, some small. The loaves aren't elegant. They don't care. These aren't temple offerings or bakery displays. They're tools, vehicles for fermentation. They crack at the edges like sun-baked bricks and smell like damp cereal. You pass the finished dough to a girl waiting at the kiln. She smiles, revealing teeth stained slightly purple from berries. She lays each loaf onto a hot stone slab inside the oven and seals the top with a domed clay lid. Smoke creeps through the cracks, and soon the air thickens with the scent of baking crust and scorched date sugar. The loaves don't take long. Some are puffed, some flat. Others, bless them, are practically burnt to charcoal. You break one open and sniff. Inside, it's soft and warm, like the inside of your palm after a long day of sun. Steam curls upward, carrying a ghost of barley and yeast. You set the bread aside to cool, letting it harden into the dense sponge that beer loves. You remember the old man from 2 nights ago, the one who swore his wife's bread was better than the god's own nectar. He claimed she once baked beer bread that made 3 fishermen cry. You want to believe him. Historians still argue whether this step, baking loaves before fermentation, was meant to concentrate, sugars sterilize the grain, or simply make transport easier. You think maybe it was all of the above. In a world without measuring cups or timers, consistency was magic, and magic was just controlled chaos with good storytelling. Once the bread cools, you begin tearing it apart. Not daintily, this is demolition. You crumble it into a new clay vat, the pieces soaking up water poured slowly from a decorated jug. The mixture becomes slop, then pulp, then something between dough and drink. You stir with a reed paddle, watching it all dissolve back into a familiar slurry. This too will become beer. But as you work, your mind drifts. You wonder what happens to the loaves that fail. Not these, but the ones in the past. Did someone drink a bad batch and decide they were cursed? Did they blame a god or just the weather? You once heard a story that a brewer's batch turned so sour even the crocodiles refused to sniff it. You don't know if it's true, but it feels right. You sit on the floor legs, stretched out arms crusted in dough. A woman near you hums an old brewing song. It's wordless, just sound and rhythm. You join in quietly. The paddling of the mash keeps tempo. Later in the day, the clay jars return, cleaned, warmed by the sun, and ready for more. You ladle the new mash into them, each jar a little different, some thicker, some with more sediment, some already bubbling at the edges. You whisper small wishes into each one. Not prayers exactly, just hopes. One jar fizzes louder than the others. You watch it carefully. It might be special, or it might be rebellious. Hard to say. Either way, it gets extra palm fronds on top, like a reward for enthusiasm. You stack the leftover bread crusts near the fire pit. They'll be dried out and reused later, maybe for tomorrow's batch, maybe just as goat treats. Waste isn't a thing here. Everything circles back. As the sun lowers, you wipe your hands clean with a bit of damp linen and drink from a cracked cup near the door. It's water this time. Your body thanks you. One of the elders walks by, sniffs the air, and nods once like he approves of the latest loaves. Or maybe he's just acknowledging your general existence. It's hard to read him. His face hasn't changed expression since the last flood. You stretch your legs and lie back on a reed mat. The heat of the day still lingers in the clay floor. You listen to the hum of insects, the creak of wood, and the ever-present whisper of the Nile beyond the trees. You've baked, brewed, crumbled, and stirred, and somehow all of that felt like a kind of prayer. Tomorrow you drink again. You're awoken by laughter low and lazy, the kind that comes from people already halfway through a second cup of something questionable. You rub your eyes still crusted with barley dust and shuffle out toward the central courtyard. Today isn't a work day. Today is a drinking day. Again. But this one feels different. There's a large circle forming under the shade of a sycamore tree near the edge of the village. Someone has dragged out 3 beer jars still sweating from early morning sun and arranged them like an altar. Around them sit the usual suspects, the quiet woman with the judgmental eyes, the young guy who thinks he's funnier than he is, and at least 2 elders who have no intention of letting the beer do all the talking. You join the circle reed straw tucked behind your ear like a carpenter's pencil. The air smells like warm, grain, dusty earth, and the promise of someone falling over by noon. The beer tastes stronger today. Maybe it's just had time to age. Maybe it's the sunlight playing tricks. Or maybe the fermenting gods decided to cut loose. Either way, it goes down smooth, then comes back up your nose with a sour tingle. You wipe your mouth and grin. Conversations rise and fall like the Nile. Topics shift wildly. Weather goats who saw which spirit on which path last night. A woman insists she saw a jackal dance near the brewery. A child asks if the jackal drank any beer. No one answers. Someone starts drumming on an upturned basket. It's not rhythmically accurate, but it's enthusiastic. Soon, a few voices join in with a chant, and feet begin tapping dust into the air. The song has no words, or maybe too many. You lose track. You're too busy trying to drink and clap at the same time. You glance around the circle. Everyone here has done something to earn their cup. They've ground barley until their wrists cracked, hauled jars through muddy fields, burned loaves in kilns, swatted goats away from cooling mash. And now they sit together in the dirt, equal parts exhausted and proud. A small wrestling match breaks out near the sycamore's roots. 2 boys, both barely tall enough to carry a full jar, are tangled in a match that seems more about style than strength. One of them does a dramatic flop to the ground, and the other trips over him trying to celebrate. The crowd roars with laughter. You notice the beer jars are almost empty. Someone begins filling them again from backup containers buried in the cool shade of the granary. These jars are older, sealed tight, marked with scratch symbols on the sides. You recognize one of them as the moon batch brewed during the last lunar festival. The story goes that a priest accidentally blessed it twice, so now it's either sacred or cursed. Possibly both. You take a sip. It's sweeter with a strange floral note. You can't tell if that's deliberate or if something lived in the jar for a while. You choose to believe it's a special recipe. Historians still argue whether ancient beer gatherings like this had any formal structure. Some records suggest ritual significance, offerings to deities, markers of seasonal transitions. Others point to sheer necessity. When the brew's ready, it doesn't wait for your calendar. You're inclined to believe it was both. After all, beer doesn't judge why you drink it, just that you do. As the sun climbs, the conversations mellow. People lean back on their elbows. Some nap right there in the dust cups, still half full beside them. One elder begins telling a story about the first brewer, a woman who discovered fermentation by accident when her bread dough went bad in a rainstorm. She thought it was a sign from the gods, he says. Or maybe just a sign she shouldn't have left the lid off. The story spirals into a debate about lids. When did lids become common? Did better lids ruin flavor? Someone argues that all the best brews had a little surprise in them. Another says, yes, the surprise was illness. You stretch out on the edge of the circle and let the voices fade into the background hum of the afternoon. Your body is heavy, like your bones are made of cooled clay. Your head is light like a gourd left floating in the Nile. Eventually, a girl passes around a reed fan, and people begin helping each other sit up, clean up, and stumble toward their huts. The gathering slowly unravels like a worn reed basket. Some carry leftover jars home. Others offer theirs to neighbors. A few just lie back down and decide to be furniture until nightfall. You stay behind to help clean. Cups are rinsed in a shallow bowl, straws bundled for drying. You collect the last of the grain sediment from the bottoms of jars, thick, sludgy, oddly fragrant. This will be fed to pigs used in flatbread, or maybe turned into tomorrow's goat bribe. Nothing is wasted. The sun dips lower, painting the tree trunks in amber. The air cools. Somewhere in the distance, a river bird calls out in that drawn-out, weary tone that suggests it, too, has had a few sips of something strong. You carry one of the empty jars back to the brewery, your steps slow, steady. Your fingers leave faint prints on the dust-coated sides. You set it down near the fire pit, then sit beside it, letting your back rest against its curved warmth. There's something comforting in the quiet after so much noise. Something soft in knowing that today you are part of something old, unrecorded, and real. Tomorrow you'll start again. The next morning, the village is quieter, slower, like it too is recovering from the laughter and fermented cheer of the day before. You hear it in the rhythm of footsteps outside, the way the clay pots are handled more gently, the absence of goats attempting Olympic stunts on top of baskets. Even the Nile seems to glide more softly, its ripples lazy and thick, like yesterday's beer. But you've got a new mission to explore the funk. You return to the fermentation jars, and immediately your nose twitches. This one is different. It's Tangier with a kind of pungent kick that makes you blink. You lean in and take another cautious sniff. Ah, yes, this is the one. The bread mash you prepared 2 days ago has turned into a lumpy, bubbling cauldron of hope, confusion, and microbial mischief. There's foam clinging to the sides like swamp scum, and the top layer is swirling faintly all on its own. Someone nearby mutters, "That one's alive." You think they're joking, but you're not entirely sure. You stir the mash, gently releasing a wave of smells that could double as both sacred aroma and biological warfare. It's yeasty sour and has hints of what is that onion's wet leather, a whiff of regret, hard to say. But it's doing what it's supposed to do. Historians still argue whether this stage of Nubian beer was intentional fermentation or simply the result of letting nature run wild. Some believe the ancient brewers carefully nurtured yeast strains by reusing fermentation jars, while others say it was more about luck and blind hope. After inhaling this vat's perfume, you suspect it's a little of both. You dip in a reed straw and taste. It's intense. Your tongue recoils slightly. There's the sour base you've come to expect, but also a weird sweetness like someone stirred in honey and then tried to unstir it. You swallow, then pause. Your stomach seems uncertain. A woman pats your back sympathetically. "That one's not ready," she says in her local dialect, then pours some into a gourd cup and drinks anyway. You admire her bravery even as your mouth tries to forget what just happened. Later in the day, you sit beside the fire pit with a few others sorting out today's blend. Some batches are mixed with leftover mash from older jars, which have been resting underground like secrets. One jar's labeled with a small scratch symbol, 2 overlapping spirals. No one knows what it means. Probably do not open, which means, of course, that it gets opened first. This jar's contents are almost completely solid, thick and black like bread pudding left in the sun too long. The smell is incredible, though earthy, almost smoky, and surprisingly floral. It's strange how time transforms slop into something sacred. You scoop a bit of the old mash into the newer batch. A man beside you mutters, "Give it ancestors," and you nod solemnly. The phrase is often used when blending brews, implying that every good beer needs the wisdom of past batches. It's also something people say right before pouring the last bit of a cup onto the ground for the spirits, or for the ants. Depends who you ask. You stir the mash again, this time more slowly, more mindfully. The wooden paddle moves through the sludge like a boat through reeds. You add water from a fresh jug filtered again through sandcloth and sheer optimism and adjust the mix until it feels right. Then comes the waiting. You leave the jars in a shaded corner of the brewery propped slightly to allow gas to escape. You don't want a repeat of the fermentation explosion that happened 2 weeks ago. Someone's hut still smells like vinegar. To pass the time, you wander to the nearby field where a few villagers are harvesting more grain. The stalks shimmer golden in the light, and the wind carries the dry rustle of leaves like whispers. You think of how many batches start here, how something that looks so plain, so stubbornly rooted in the dirt, can become something that brings a village together. You pluck a barley head and roll it in your fingers. The grains pop loose like tiny promises. Maybe next week's brew will come from this patch. Maybe someone years from now will drink it and claim it tastes like the moon, or like their grandmother's kitchen, or like nothing else in the world. Later, back at the hut, you check the jars again. The bubbling has slowed. The foam is gentler now, forming soft rings around the clay. You take a cautious sip, just a little. It's still funky, still alive, but now with depth. A little spice, a hint of fruit, something you can't name but don't want to stop tasting. You fill a small cup and offer it to an elder who drinks, considers, and simply says, "Good," which coming from him is basically a standing ovation. As evening settles in, you light a small fire and warm your hands. The jars sit in a half circle around you like sleeping beasts. You think about how much you've learned not from scrolls or lectures, but from messes, mistakes, and the sour joy of experimentation. You take one more sip and exhale through your nose. This is beer, not clean, not easy, not perfect, but undeniably alive. You rise before dawn again, not because anyone made you, but because the brewery has become its own kind of gravity. It pulls you in. The jars, the fire pit, the scent of roasted grain lingering in the walls, it's all familiar now. Comfortable in a way only messy hands-on things ever become. Today you're back at the heart of it, fermentation by fire. The coals in the pit are still glowing faintly from last night like sleeping eyes. You add fresh fuel-dry twigs, bits of dung, old palm husks, and coax the fire into life with a breath and a prayer. Soon smoke curls upward in lazy spirals, and the heat returns to the earth-packed floor. You position the jars over the shallow fire trench, half buried and snug against warm stones. The heat isn't direct, it rises in waves, warming the undersides gently, just enough to encourage the yeasts to keep partying without scorching the whole operation. This step is delicate. Too much heat, and you kill the brew. Too little, and fermentation slows to a crawl. There's no thermometer, no gadget to warn you. You rely on touch, palming the jar's side, watching the surface bubble, listening to the whispers of foam. It's strangely intimate, like you're tuning an instrument only you can hear. One of the older brewers, her hair wrapped in a faded scarf, her arms dusted with ash, comes by and nods at your setup. She doesn't say much. She never does. Just gives you a look that says, "Don't screw this up." You don't plan to. As the jars warm, the air inside the hut thickens with scent, sour, nutty, a hint of smoke, and something you can only describe as fermented ambition. You sit beside the fire with a paddle across your knees and watch the steam curl from the mouths of the jars. The whole place feels like a potion lab run by exhausted farmers. You take a sip from yesterday's batch. It's smoother now, more mellow. The funk has settled into something you could almost call complex if you were trying to impress a noble. You lean back against a mud wall and let the warmth seep into your bones. Someone brings in a fresh batch of cracked grain for tomorrow's brew, and you help sort it by hand. Pebbles, stalk, bits, husks. The work is mindless, but your fingers know what to do. You find a cracked barley kernel shaped like a crescent moon. You save it. Maybe it's lucky. Maybe it's just pretty. Either way, it's tucked into the hem of your tunic before anyone sees. By midday, the jars have reached peak warmth. You can feel it in the way the foam rises and falls like breath. You stir each one gently, whispering to the brew, not because it can hear, but because you can. You say things like, "Not too fast," and "Hold it together," and "Please don't explode this time." They listen, mostly. Historians still argue whether this fire-assisted fermentation method was intentional or accidental. Some say it was about maintaining control. Others think it was simply about comfort, keeping the beer warm because the brewers were cold. You believe both. Necessity is invention's mother, but comfort is its favorite uncle. Later in the afternoon, someone proposes a heat test. You know what that means, time for the blindfolded jar game. It's a local tradition part, joke part training. A newcomer is blindfolded and tasked with placing their hand on each jar, guessing which one is ready based on warmth alone. You volunteer because of course you do. You're spun around 3 times too fast in your opinion and guided to the first jar. You press your palm against it. Too cool. You move to the next warmer, but no foam. The third gives a tiny hiss when you touch it. Ah. That's the one. You declare your choice. The crowd nods. A few clap. One elder says still not as good as the girl last flood, who chose the jar by smell alone. You shrug. No one can compete with the legend of Nosmira. The jars are now in their final stage, half fermented, halfway to glory. You cover them and let the heat fade slowly as the sun sets. The fire dies down, reduced to a glowing line of orange embers across the pit. You clean your tools in a shallow basin, hands red from grain residue and soot. Then, as always, you sit. You sit and listen, not to people most have gone home, but to the quiet, to the tiny bubbles rising, to the shift of the wind against the palm leaves, to the near-silent hum of fermentation still doing its ancient invisible work. You remember something you overheard days ago. Beer isn't made by people. It's made by time. You didn't understand it then. You do now. One of the village children sneaks in with a cracked cup and a reed straw. He glances at you half scared. You nod once and ladle a small scoop from the gentlest jar. He sips, makes a face, then smiles. He runs off before you can say anything. Just a blur of bare feet and sticky hands. You laugh. This, too, is the work of the brewery. As night falls, the hut glows faintly from the dying fire. You lie on a mat in the corner, the jars standing sentinel around you. They gurgle softly like old friends snoring through their dreams. You pull your scarf over your eyes and sleep to the sound of ancient science. You wake with a dry mouth, a stiff neck, and the vague feeling that someone blessed or cursed you in your sleep. The fermentation jars are quiet now, their contents settled, their spirits calmed. It's bottling day. Or rather jarring day, since bottles haven't been invented yet, and glass is something the pharaohs hoard like gossip. You rise slowly, joints clicking like worn-out door hinges, and splash water on your face. It doesn't help much, but it's a start. Outside, the sun is just crawling over the trees, and the fire pit glows with yesterday's leftover embers. The brewery feels still, but not empty. Something's ready. You unwrap the palm fronds from the fermentation jars and peek inside. Foam has flattened. Scents have matured, less aggressive, more rounded. You could almost call it pleasant. You stir gently and watch the mix swirl with the ease of thick soup, no longer defiant. You call for help, not because you can't handle it alone, but because it's tradition. No one jugs beer alone. 2 boys bring in a set of clean clay jars smaller than the fermentation ones, but still hefty. Each one is wrapped in cloth at the base and has a narrow spout at the top, perfect for pouring but terrible for cleaning. Naturally, you begin the slow process of ladling the finished beer into these storage jars. It's a balancing act. You want as much liquid as possible, but not too much sediment. Some people love the chewiness of Nubian beer. Others don't want it to fight back. You split the difference and pour carefully. A woman walks in with a bundle of reed stoppers, each tied with dried fiber string. She watches you work and nods not approval, just acknowledgement. Then she begins sealing jars. Each gets a plug, then a layer of beeswax, then an extra layer of woven grass tied tight. Not pretty, very secure. Historians still debate whether Nubian beer was stored for long-term use or consumed within days. You suspect it was both some for parties, some for tribute, some hidden for emergencies that involved guests showing up uninvited. With the jars sealed and cooling in the shade, you finally sit. The boys who helped you are now play fighting with the empty ladle like it's a royal scepter. One whacks the other and is immediately chased across the courtyard, both laughing so hard they forget to breathe. The rest of the day moves at half speed. You're invited to deliver a jar to the shrine at the village edge, the one with the painted ibex and the offerings that come and go like tides. You carry the jar in both arms, muscles burning from the awkward weight. The path is dusty and lined with thorny brush. You step around a sleeping dog, then two sleeping elders, neither of whom seem to mind being passed by something sacred. The shrine is quiet. Inside, the air is cooler, the smell a mix of old ash, fresh flowers, and fermented hope. You place the jar near the altar stone and kneel for a moment, not to pray exactly, just to breathe, to acknowledge. Brewing beer might not seem divine, but when you trace every step from barley to flame to foam, it's hard not to feel like you've been part of something ancient and ongoing. A beetle crawls across the floor near the offering bowls. You watch it with respect. It's working too. On your way back, you pass by the granary and hear someone arguing about a wage. You stop, linger, listen. The topic: beer. Apparently, two workers want extra jars as part of their pay. The overseer disagrees. A third voice offers to mediate holding a half-full cup. You can't tell if they're drunk or just inspired, maybe both. Historians know Nubian beer wasn't just refreshment, it was currency. It paid laborers, settled debts, and softened negotiations. You think about the time someone traded 2 goats and a clay plate for a single jar of the moon batch. Good deal. Depends on your feelings about goats. Back at the brewery, you take one of the remaining jars and pour yourself a cup. It's warm, of course, no ice, no cellar, no clay refrigerator, but it's smooth, sweet, a bit tangy, but in a way that says, I've been somewhere. You swirl the cup. Sediment clings to the sides like fingerprints. You sip. It's the best batch yet. Maybe it's because you helped grind the grain by hand, stirred it with a cracked paddle, and cursed the fire when it got too hot. Maybe it's just luck. But it tastes like everything good from the past 10 days bottled into one muddy cup. A man joins you holding a reed flute. He doesn't say anything, just sits and plays a few notes. They float above the jars, soft and slow, like steam rising from morning porridge. A dog wanders and flops on the ground and sighs. Evening settles slowly like smoke. You cover the remaining jars, stack the empty ones, and sweep the floor with a bundle of stiff reeds. Dust swirls in the light. Your arms ache in a way that's almost comforting. You sit back down and look at the sealed jars lined up like quiet guards. You don't need to label them. You remember which is which. You always will. You take one last sip, then close your eyes. The beer is finished. For now. You wake to the sound of soft slurping and muffled conversation. Mornings in Nubia rarely begin with silence. Someone is already sipping from a reed straw outside the brewery, and judging by the laughter, it's not water. You stretch slowly, deliberately, every joint a little more sluggish after a week of brewing, lifting, stirring, and occasionally tasting things that should probably come with a warning. Today's not about making beer. Today is about drinking it with style. You find your own reed straw, still damp from yesterday's rinsing, and wipe it on the edge of your tunic. You eye the largest jar, the one from the quiet batch that fermented next to the wall, undisturbed like a shy genius. It's cool to the touch. The beeswax seal is still intact, and the surface of the plug glistens faintly in the early sun. With a quick twist, you break the seal. The scent hits immediately funky floral, a little smoky. You close your eyes and inhale deeply. Yes, this is the one. You dip the straw, plunge it to the bottom, and take your first sip. Smooth. Gritty, familiar. It's not wine, it's not even juice. It's a meal you can drink and a memory you can taste. A few others gather around. Some sit on mats, others balance on overturned baskets. No one waits for an invitation. One by one, they slide their straws in beside yours like participants in an ancient beer ritual or a very sleepy jazz ensemble. Soon the jar is surrounded. This is beer etiquette in Nubia. No cups, no pours, no speeches, just the straw in the jar. And if you drink too slow, someone else will find your spot. You notice a new addition to the crew, an elder who usually stays near the shrine. He has a straw carved with tiny grooves stained dark from years of use. He doesn't speak much, just sips with a face like carved wood. After a few pulls, he raises an eyebrow and says, "This one's brave." You're not sure if that's good or bad, but everyone nods like it's the highest praise imaginable. The drinking continues, and with it, the storytelling. One man tells of a fisherman who swore he saw the goddess of the Nile dancing in the reeds after drinking a full jar solo. Another woman claims her grandmother used to whisper beer recipes to goats, insisting that they understand balance. Laughter ripples through the group, but no one questions her. Around here, nothing is truly unbelievable if it's told with confidence. You sip again, this time slower. The flavor has evolved. You get a hint of dried dates, a whisper of smoke, and something you can't quite place. Clay dust wisdom. It doesn't matter. The jar is talking now. Historians still debate whether drinking from a communal jar was hygienic, symbolic, or just convenient. Some say it promoted equality. Others point out that it probably just saved dishes. But sitting here, you get it, the jar is the table. It gathers everyone into its orbit. No one's more important. Everyone's thirsty. Later, a younger boy tries to muscle in, waving his reed like a sword. Someone gently redirects him to the kid jar, a smaller, weaker batch with extra water and fewer surprises. He sulks for 2 seconds, then gulps his portion like a warrior anyway. His mother watches nearby, unimpressed. As the sun climbs, the beer warms. The straw suction gets trickier. Sediment thickens at the bottom like the last pages of a long, sloppy poem. You keep sipping, then pass the straw to someone else. You've had enough of this one. Time to sample from another. A woman taps you on the shoulder and leads you to a shaded corner of the brewery where a wide-mouthed jar rests on a platform of woven mats. It's marked with a simple symbol, a curl with 3 dots. She calls it the Quiet Storm. You try it. Whoa! This one hits differently, less sweet, more acidic. It has bite, like it's been thinking deep thoughts in silence and is now ready to share them all at once. You take another sip and cough lightly. She laughs. It tells the truth, she says. By afternoon, the drinking becomes quieter, not somber, just thoughtful. The stories slow down, the laughter softens. People lean against each other, not out of need, but out of habit. Someone begins to hum an old brewing song. You don't know the words, but you join in anyway. It's mostly vowels and sighs, like wind trying to remember a tune. You think of how many generations have done this exact thing, brewed in clay, drank from reeds, shared fermented dreams under the same sun, and how many will do it after you. Beer is a river, not a jar. It flows through time, shaped by every hand that stirs it. You take your last sip of the day as the sun tilts westward. The jar's bottom is near. The straws squeak faintly as they scrape for the last good mouthfuls. Someone gently pulls yours away and pats your shoulder. Leave a little for the spirits, they say. You nod. Later, you help clean the area, rinsing straws, stacking mats, covering the jars that still have something to give tomorrow. You sweep the dirt floor with an old broom that sheds more than it sweeps, but no one complains. The smell of beer still clings to everything, and no one wants it gone too soon. As night falls, you sit outside the brewery, the straw still tucked behind your ear. You've drunk, laughed, shared, and listened, not just to the people, but to the brew itself. And the brew, as always, spoke volumes. You awaken to the unmistakable sound of heated debate, low voices, measured words, the occasional sharp snort of disagreement. Not fighting, just arguing the way people do when they've had enough sleep to be dangerous and just enough beer to feel scholarly. You roll off your mat, rub your eyes, and follow the noise to the edge of the sycamore shade. There, seated on low stools around a half-empty beer jar, are the elders. They're mid-discussion on a topic of grave importance, whose brew was better, your most recent batch, or the one brewed last flood season under the crooked tamarind tree. Everyone has opinions. Everyone is naturally correct. You sit quietly, reed straw resting in your lap, and sip from your cup as they volley arguments like seasoned philosophers. One elder claims last year's batch had more heart. Another insists it was thin as duck spit. A third leans in and says, "Let's not forget the fig incident," to which everyone groans, and 2 people laugh so hard they spill their drinks. You don't speak. You know the rule: if you brewed it, you let others judge it. But still, you feel a small flicker of pride when someone mutters, "This one's cleaner." It doesn't bite back. You pretend not to hear, but your shoulders sit a little straighter. The conversation eventually drifts, as all good beer chats do, into gossip. Apparently, the brewer downriver has started fermenting with lotus petals. For aroma, they say. For show counters, an elder. Another pipes up for pretending they invented something new when they really just burned the barley again. Everyone chuckles. You sip quietly amused. Later, a man you've only seen at festivals shows up with a small jug and a very smug smile. He calls it Sun Batch, brewed entirely in jars placed atop flat rocks and fermented with nothing but sun heat and positive thoughts. It smells like vinegar and old sandals. He offers you a taste. You pretend to cough and hand it off to someone braver. They take a sip, blink 3 times, and say, "That's interesting," which is how you say "I regret everything" in polite brewery terms. As the gossip and judging continue, the conversation drifts into wages and beers roll in them. You sit up a little straighter. A laborer nearby talks about how he worked the barley fields for 5 days straight last season and was paid only with 2 jars of flat brew and a chicken that wouldn't stop screaming. He's not bitter, but the chicken is. Others nod in agreement. Beer as wages is nothing new. Everyone knows it's cheaper than silver, more immediate than grain, and far more appreciated than a handshake. But as one elder says, the value of beer is in who brewed it. Good beer feeds your belly. Great beer feeds your reputation. You look over at your jars lined up in the brewery's shaded corner, sealed tight, some still slightly warm. One already bears a scratch mark, a quiet sign that someone's bartered for it later. Historians have debated for decades about how laborers in ancient Nubia were paid. Beer appears in transaction records, in murals, in temple ledgers, but whether it was a symbol of status or simply sustenance remains unclear. Here you see it's both. People respect a brewer not because they know secrets, but because they know patience. You're offered another cup, this time from a newer brew, younger and sharper. It hits your throat like a slap from a cool river. You blink, then nod. Not bad. Maybe not ready, but promising. Across the courtyard, someone's cooking flat cakes with crushed lentils and roasted garlic. The smell drifts toward you. A woman passes by with a platter and a grin. You trade her a small scoop of yesterday's brew for a slice of cake. No words exchanged. The trade speaks for itself. The sun arcs high overhead. The gossip fades into lull. The elders stretch their backs. The brewer with the sun batch disappears, mysteriously, possibly chased off by taste testers demanding refunds. You take the opportunity to step into the brewery alone, cup in hand. You sit beside the fermentation jars. The light slants just right through the cracks. In the wall, dust motes dancing lazily. You sip. The jar beside you is nearly empty, but the sediment left behind is rich, thick, filled with quiet power. You stir it with your straw and watch the way it swirls like a story that hasn't finished being told. Someone enters quietly and sits beside you. It's the elder with the carved straw. He doesn't speak, just sips, then mutters, "You should be proud." You don't respond. You just clink your straw gently against his in a quiet toast. Outside, the world is noisy again. Chickens argue, children shriek, someone drops a jar and curses creatively. But inside the brewery, it's still, peaceful, and just funky enough. You lie back on the mat, hands behind your head, beer cooling in your belly. You're not just a brewer now. You're part of the gossip. You wake to the rhythmic thumping of feet on packed earth. Steady focus, no nonsense. A procession is passing outside your hut, and at its center is a cart carrying baskets of grain and 3 full beer jars, each sealed and scrawled with symbols you've never seen. You squint at the last jar. The mark looks suspiciously like a fish dancing. You step outside, rubbing your neck. The sky is still pink, but the village is buzzing. Someone's being paid today, and beer is on the books. You follow the cart down the slope to the threshing yard where the laborers gather. Some are barefoot, others in worn sandals. Most carry tools, flails, baskets, blades, dulled by sun and time. They've spent the past week harvesting grain, and now they'll be paid not in coin or cloth, but in something more immediate, beer and bread. You recognize one of the workers from your own brewing sessions, a woman with forearms like tree roots and a laugh that could shake mud loose from a jar. She catches your eye, grins, and points to one of the jars on the cart. "That one's yours, isn't it?" she asks. You nod sheepishly. "Good, it better be." And she walks off to collect her share. You watch as the foreman opens the first jar and fills a line of cups. People step forward one by one, receiving their allotment like sacred communion. There's no weighing, no measuring, just intuition and trust. Okay, also a little glaring to make sure no one double dips. You're invited to help distribute. You take the ladle and fill each vessel carefully. Some people bring clay cups, others gourds. A few just hold out their palms, joking, "Just a splash, I'm thirsty." You oblige. It's hot. The air is full of dust, and everyone smells like work. You pass a man who downs his share in one gulp and immediately begins singing loud off-key, something about a fish that fell in love with a date tree. The crowd groans. Again, someone mutters. Apparently, this is his go-to post-beer ballad. Once the jars are empty, people return to their homes or shade corners to nap or talk. You linger washing out the ladles when a few younger workers approach. They're curious about the process. How do you know when the mash is ready? Can you use honey instead of dates? What happens if you ferment inside a jar that once held salted fish? You smile, answer what you can, make up the rest with confident shrugs. That's how most of brewing works anyway. One boy asks why the beer was a little weaker than the last batch. You nod. "We diluted it with water," you say, "because it's payment. We want it to stretch." He frowns. "So you make it worse on purpose." You pause, then laugh. "No, we make it generous on purpose." Historians often puzzle over how beer worked as currency. Was it calculated by labor hour, by jar size? Was there a chart somewhere etched into stone that declared 3 loaves and a mug per goat wrangler? Probably not. But here, the math is simple: work earns drink, and drink makes work tolerable. You walk back toward the brewery and find someone sweeping the courtyard. She waves at you, then points to a stack of old jars behind the kiln. "These still have dregs," she says. "Good for pig slop or bad stew." You check one. Thick, sour sludge-like. Definitely not for guests, but not wasted either. You load a few onto a cart and roll them to the animal pens. The pigs crowd the trough like they've been told it's festival day. One snorts happily as it slurps, and you wonder briefly if pigs appreciate good fermentation. Probably not, but they never complain. Later, you're approached by a neighbor, a wiry man with a scarred lip and a sharp eye for trade. He wants a jar for his daughter's upcoming wedding, not for the ceremony, just for the groom's uncles. They're picky, he says. Not good picky, annoying picky. You lead him to the brewery's cool back room where a few sealed jars rest. He sniffs the tops, listens to the slosh inside like he's judging a musical instrument. He picks one marked with a crooked line and 3 dots. "This one," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "That one kicked a man off his stool last week." He shrugs. "Perfect." Payment is a clay bowl, freshly made, painted with simple designs, spirals, birds, grain stalks. It's beautiful in its own way. You accept it without words. The trade feels good. As the sun begins to set, you sit on the brewery's threshold and sip from your own cup. It's not the strongest beer, not the best flavor, but it's yours. Brewed by your hands, stored in your jars, passed from lips to lips in quiet celebration and mild arguments. You remember a time just days ago when you didn't know how to feel the temperature of a jar by touch, how to judge yeast from scent, how to recognize the sound of a ferment that's gone too quiet. Now it's second nature. You take another sip. Tomorrow more barley will arrive. More work, more strange requests. Someone will claim their uncle invented a new brewing trick. Someone will demand you teach their child how to make beer, but not drink it. Someone else will try to pay you with a chicken again. You don't mind. Beer is more than drink here. It's a language, and now you speak it. The morning air smells like grain dust and wet clay. Familiar now, almost comforting. You stretch your arms and wince slightly at a shoulder, still sore from hauling jars yesterday. The brewery is quiet for once, but not for long. Today, you're expecting someone new. She arrives just after sunrise, wrapped in linen barefoot, with a posture that says she's been brewing longer than you've been breathing. She doesn't smile, doesn't announce herself, doesn't ask where the tools are. She just walks in, sets her basket down, and gets to work. Everyone simply steps aside. You already know who she is. You've heard the stories. The matriarch brewer, the one with cracked hands and no time for nonsense. She grinds barley like she's threatening it. Every motion precise, no wasted energy. Her paddle movements are short efficient. Her loaves never burn. Her jars never explode. They say once her batch was so good, the priest cried into his cup and blamed the moon. You offer to help. She gives you a look, not unkind but definitely measuring. After a moment she nods. You grab a basket and start sorting grain beside her. She speaks very little. Occasionally she grunts in your direction. Once, when your paddle skims the edge of the jar too fast, she hisses, "Slow." Beer doesn't like panic. You slow down. She nods. It feels like applause. Others begin to arrive not for beer, but to watch. Quietly, casually, like they're just passing by, but everyone wants to see her work. She begins preparing the mash. Her method is different. She layers the ingredients, malt bread pieces, warm water, then date paste in thin stripes across the top. No mixing. Not yet. She covers the jar, waits 15 heartbeats, then stirs. The smell is immediate, rich, balanced, alive. Someone nearby gasps. You try not to look smug. She hands you a cup and nods at a separate jar. You taste. It's from yesterday's batch, already partially fermented. You sip. It's good, not flashy, not fancy, just solid, steady. It tastes like someone who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Historians rarely recorded the women of Nubian brewing. Most temple scribes listed the offerings, the ingredients, but not the hands behind them. Yet here it's obvious women run the brewery, quietly, completely. The men might pour the drinks or argue over batches, but these loaves, these jars, this balance of heat and time, that's women's work. You take a mental note of everything she does, how she checks water temperature with the inside of her wrist, how she listens to the foam, how she never measures, yet never misses. Later, she brings out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside her tools, a paddle worn smooth like driftwood, a flat stone for grinding with a deep groove in the center, a reed marked with notches, maybe for stirring, maybe for memory. She lets you hold them. Briefly, you feel like you've been handed a relic. As she works, others bring her ingredients. One girl with a basket of dates, another with dried herbs. No one speaks unless she speaks first. You realize this isn't a lesson, it's a ceremony. She finishes the batch and covers the jar. Then she sits beside it. Not to rest, but to guard. Brewing, she once said, isn't finished when the jar's sealed. It's finished when it chooses to be. You offer her water. She declines. Then, after a pause, takes it anyway. That feels like another nod. As the sun climbs, she begins reviewing the other jars in the brewery. One by one, she lifts lids, sniffs, stirs. Some she nods at. One she frowns at and mutters, "Too warm." You add extra cloth over that one. Crisis averted. She pauses at one jar, your most recent batch, the one you were proud of. She dips her straw, tastes, and tilts her head. You wait. She says nothing, just hands the straw back. That night, she prepares a small fire near the brewery door and sits beside it. Others gather in the dark, each bringing a cup or a story. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, people listen. She tells of a time when the beer refused to foam and the goats refused to eat, and how she knew the barley had gone numb from the rain. She tells of a man who tried to brew with river moss and accidentally summoned a smell no one could forget. She even laughs once, just once, when someone asks what happens if the beer gets too strong. Then you drink slower, she says, or fall faster. You sit beside her, and for the first time all day, she speaks directly to you. You're listening now. That's good. The beer notices. Then she stands, stretches, and leaves. No goodbye. Just a jar left behind marked with 3 dots and a single slash. You uncover it after she's gone. It smells different. Not like anything you've brewed. Deeper, softer. You sip and for a moment you forget where you are. It tastes like memory. By now, your mornings begin not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet agreement between you and the clay walls you wake, and they keep your secrets. The brewery has become less of a workplace and more of a second skin. You know where every jar lives, where the floor creaks just enough to remind you it's been there longer than anyone still walking on it. Today, though you're leaving it for now, you follow a group of neighbors to a burial site just outside the village near the edge of the low hills. There's no mourning here, no wailing or black cloth, just soft singing and arms full of gifts. The departed was old, respected, and well-fed. That's the most anyone can ask for. And among the gifts being carried beer, not just any jar either, one of yours. You feel a strange shiver, not fear, but something adjacent. A sense that what you've made is being carried, not just into another home, but into history. The jar is marked with the same 3 dots the matriarch brewer carved the other day. You run your fingers over the wax seal before the priest takes it. The burial is simple. A clay-lined pit, low walls, a few grave goods tools, ornaments, loaves of flatbread. Someone places the beer jar beside a painted bowl, and for a moment it looks like the spirit of the deceased will wake up and take a sip. One of the elders leans toward you and whispers beers for the living, but it helps the dead feel welcome. You nod. You understand now. This isn't just tradition, it's continuity. Historians still puzzle over the beer jars found in Nubian tombs. Were they symbolic, functional, spiritual? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the answer was simply yes. You return to the village with the others, the late afternoon sun brushing your face with gold and dust. Your hands smell like barley again. They always do now. Later curiosity pulls you toward the temple murals near the center of the village. You've passed them 100 times, but today you look closer. And there they are, beer scenes. Not grand, not flashy. Just etched into plaster in fine, slow lines, women pouring mash, men lifting jars, a child reaching for a cup and being gently redirected. You spot one figure hunched over a kiln hair tied in a familiar twist. For a heartbeat, you swear it's the matriarch. Maybe it is. Or maybe every brewer looks the same when they're bent over hot clay, chasing foam and flame. One section of the mural makes you stop entirely. It's a tall jar, stylized, its lid half lifted. Inside swirls lines and small dots, 3 of them arranged in a curve. You've seen that mark before, on your jar, on hers. You reach out to trace it with your finger, but stop short of touching. The stone has waited long enough. It doesn't need reminders. That evening, back at the brewery, you sit beside your own row of sealed jars. They're quieter now. The rush of learning has softened into the slow rhythm of knowing. You stir one check, another tap, the third gently with your knuckles, just to hear it answer. Someone stops by with a request. A small batch, they say, for a naming ceremony. You nod. They offer you 2 bunches of dates and a dried fish. Fair trade. You mix a light mash that night, less sour, more soft. You whisper into the jar while stirring, half embarrassed, but it feels right. You tell it, this is for beginnings. While you work, you think back to all the debates you've overheard about beer's origin. Some say it came from the gods. Others say it came from forgetful farmers who left dough too close to the fire. But in your experience, beer comes from doing the same thing carefully, repeatedly, and with just enough chaos to make it interesting. You finish sealing the batch and place it beside the others. No mark, no need. You'll remember it. Beer brewed for a name will carry that name in its scent, in its bubbles, in the way it waits to be shared. As night deepens, you step outside and watch the moon rise. The village is still awake, but softer now. Quiet chatter, a flute playing in the distance, footsteps padded by years. You sit on the low bench near the brewery's door and sip the last of your own batch. It's thin, earthy, a little grainy, but it tastes like patience, like knowing the rhythm of heat water and time. Tomorrow you'll brew again, and the day after that. Not because you must, but because someone will need it. Beer for payment, beer for parties, beer for the dead, and always beer for the story. The next day begins not with brewing, but with questions. A visiting trader has arrived from upriver sandals caked in red dust, carrying a pack full of strange cloth and odd-smelling dried fruit. But more interesting than the goods is the story he brings of a tomb recently opened further south. Inside, they found murals, not of kings, not of gods, but of brewers. And not just any brewers, women lifting jars, tending fires, holding paddles like priestly staffs. You pause mid-stir, elbow deep in the day's mash, your ears perked. The trader doesn't stop. He describes one figure in detail, etched into stone arms, outstretched with a reed straw held like a spear, and 3 dots scratched into her collar. You freeze. You've seen those dots. You've made those dots. You leave your jar mid-stir and walk away only briefly to the cool back room where one of the matriarch's final jars still rests. You kneel beside it and trace the wax seal. 3 dots, 1 slash. A recipe, a signature, a warning. You feel something settle in your chest. Not fear, not pride, just belonging. That afternoon, the village gathers around a fresh batch for tasting. The children run wild adults, sip slower, wiser, careful not to waste what the heat has gently coaxed into bloom. You ladle from jar to cup, watching the ripples calm themselves after every scoop. The foam dances a little slower today, like it too is listening. One woman, a new face, asks where you learned to brew. You point to your hands. She laughs, then asks again gently. You think of the matriarch, of the cracked stone murals, of your own jars tucked into tombs. You shrug and say, from ghosts. Later, sitting near the fire pit, a boy asks the real question, why beer? Not why make it, not why drink it, but why beer at all? You stir the coals before answering. Then you say, because beer listens. And it does. When people are tired, it listens. When they're celebrating, it joins them. When they argue, it waits. When they leave, it stays. Historians still puzzle over why beer of all things appears in so many graves, why it's etched beside so many names. Some say it's for nourishment. Others say it's a bribe to the gods. But you know better. Beer is memory you can sip, and that's all anyone really wants to take with them. You fall asleep that night beside a half-sealed jar. The fire has burned low. The village is silent, save for frogs somewhere near the river and the faint clink of reed straws against clay. You dream of pyramids crumbling, vine-wrapped, half-swallowed by sand. Inside one is a jar, your jar, and someone's hands you don't recognize are lifting the lid, smiling, whispering, still good. The final morning comes not with fanfare, but with stillness. The brewery is silent, the jars cool and calm. Outside, the sun rises soft and slow, like it knows today isn't about hurry. You stand at the threshold, hands idle for once, and just breathe. You're not brewing today. You're finishing. There's one last jar left to open the final batch you set to ferment beneath the moonlight 2 nights ago. The mark on its lid is faint, just a thumbprint in dried wax. No symbols, no flourish, just a quiet impression as if the jar knew it didn't need a name. You crack the seal, gently peel back the cloth covering, and inhale. The scent is gentle, barley and memory. A little date, a little smoke, and something you can't name. Not spice, not sweetness, something softer. A feeling. You stir once with your reed paddle just to wake it. You carry the jar outside. Today you're brewing nothing, mixing nothing, drying nothing. Today you share. You sit beneath the oldest sycamore, the one whose branches always seem to bloom last and fade first. Around you, the village gathers slowly. No ceremony, just movement. Feet on earth. Reed straws tucked behind ears. Laughter already forming before the first sip. You ladle the beer into cups one by one. No one rushes. They know this is a farewell brew, not dramatic, not declared, just understood. The matriarch isn't here. She left 3 nights ago without a word as expected, but someone says they saw her cup resting on the altar, still warm. You taste your final batch. It's light, bright, not flat, not loud, just right. The kind of beer you'd make if you wanted someone to remember the taste without remembering why. Someone across the circle tells a story about their first brew. It was a disaster, of course. The foam collapsed, the jar cracked, the goat drank half the mash. Everyone laughs. You've heard the tale before, but today it feels new. The jar empties slowly, no one hurries. You think of the first day of sticky date paste, stubborn barley, and your own uncertainty. You think of the fire pit, the cracked paddle, the child who once spat out his first sip and declared it pond soup. You think of every mistake, and every cup that still came out full. As the sun begins to dip, a breeze kicks up across the fields. The barley stalks shiver, and you feel it in your chest, a small echo, like the aftertaste of something ancient. You rise, walk back to the brewery one last time, and tidy the space. You sweep the floor, stack the mats, wipe the paddle. You don't rush. You light a small fire in the pit, not for heat, not for brewing, just to let the smoke linger. You sit beside the jars, some full, some empty, some drying. You run your fingers across their rough surfaces. You whisper thanks for the grain, for the time, for the yeast that behaved mostly. Then you lie back on the reed mat in the far corner, arms behind your head, and let the warmth of the fire wrap around your legs like a final blanket. The brewery hums, not loud, not busy, just content. You've brewed enough. You've tasted the old ways. You've listened. And now, as the stars begin to stitch themselves across the sky, you let go. You're lying there in the dim firelight, not asleep, yet not quite awake, just floating like foam on the last sip of beer. The air smells like warm clay and old barley, that familiar scent that now feels more like a lullaby than anything else. You've done your work. You've stirred every jar, lifted every paddle, waited, listened, trusted the strange bubbling magic that is time and water and patience. Outside, the wind is low. It brushes gently through the palms, nudging their leaves like soft applause. Somewhere a flute plays, just a few notes drifting in and out, like someone remembering a tune they once heard in a dream. The fire in the pit crackles gently. It's low now, just enough to warm your toes, just enough to keep the shadows company. You roll to your side, tucking the edge of the mat under your shoulder. The floor beneath you is hard, but it feels earned, like a resting place for someone who has done something worth sleeping for. You breathe in slowly, exhale softer. The scent of beer is still on your hands. It's not loud anymore. It's mellow, faded, a memory that's still just barely holding on. And as your eyes slip closed, you feel it like a jar sealed just tight enough to keep the good things inside. You are warm. You are tired. You are finished. Sleep, brewer. The Nile will rise again tomorrow.